Hey guys, today we're going to take a look at human trafficking and the law. First, we're going to start with the global scope of human trafficking, bring it down to the local numbers, and then look at the laws that our country has addressing this. So what we know through the International Labor Organization is that around the world today, they're estimated to be at least 40 million people being exploited through human trafficking. This is happening in labor trafficking and sex trafficking in almost every country of the world, even though almost every country in the world have laws making it a crime. What are some of the reasons that human trafficking would be such a pervasive criminal industry? One of the reasons are because it can be very lucrative. A human being is like a product that can be sold over and over and over again. So in addition to other criminal industries like the illicit sale of drugs or the black market sale of weapons, human trafficking really is the third of those top three criminal industries globally. Every year around the world, human trafficking generates about $150 billion every year. One of the reasons for its excessive and lucrative growth is that if I have drugs or guns that I'm selling illegally, once I have made that sale, I have to go back and acquire more product. But with a human being, I can sell this person over and over and over again. Additionally, in many countries and even communities in America, law enforcement are not well educated on how to identify and prosecute human trafficking cases. This means that human trafficking is a crime that can be easier to commit and the criminal is less likely to be caught. Fortunately, that's not the case here in Central Texas, but across the country in places where human trafficking awareness is lower or law enforcement training is less, that can be something that increases the criminal's intent to profit through this crime. So we look right at Texas. The University of Texas School of Social Work spent 2 years trying to get a firm grip on numbers of trafficking victims in our state. What they found is that a conservative estimate would be 300,000 people being exploited through human trafficking just in Texas every year. This again is happening in labor trafficking and sex trafficking. Of that 300,000, they estimate that 79,000 victims are minors who are being trafficked in sex trafficking. So the reason it's important for us to understand how big of an issue this is because it really needs a holistic response. But how do we respond? How do we find the people who are guilty of perpetrating this crime? And how do we hold them accountable? We can't do that if we don't understand the law. So we're going to take a look at the law today, which is going to show us at the federal level who we can protect as a victim of human trafficking and who we can prosecute as guilty of human trafficking, the perpetrator of human trafficking. So human trafficking is clearly against the United States federal law. Our first modern day law addressing human trafficking in America was ratified in the year 2000. So this law is not 20 years old, and it's called the Trafficking Victims Protection Act. I'm going to leave this up here for a few seconds because I want you guys to read through some of this legalese. It's very wordy. It can be a little bit unclear, but we want to take a look at it. And then we will move on into what we call the AMP model, the Action Means Purpose model. So what we've done is we've taken all the action words from the TVPA, the Trafficking Victims Protection Act. We've taken out the means, the force, fraud, or coercion, and we've separated out the purpose for commercial sexual exploitation or forced labor. So anytime one of these purposes is happening with a victim using one of the means words and the perpetrator is engaged in any one of these action words, it can be human trafficking. So let's talk this through. So action words are recruiting, harboring, transporting, providing, obtaining, patronizing, soliciting, and advertising. Now, any single person who's involved in any one of these actions around human trafficking can be held accountable at the federal level as a human trafficker. This means the person that's transporting or giving a ride to a victim to or from the place of their exploitation or their home. The person who's advertising, who's taking the pictures and posting ads online on Craigslist or apps where they are connecting as a buyer for a commercial sex act to a victim. Even the patron or the solicitor, those words are targeting the buyer, the person who is paying for a commercial sex act. Any one of these individuals can be held accountable to the full extent of the federal law as a human trafficker. What has to be proven if the victim is an adult in labor trafficking or sex trafficking, we have to prove that there are elements of force, fraud, or coercion for this to be human trafficking. That means if an adult is consenting without any force, fraud, or coercion to a commercial sex act, they may be guilty of prostitution or some other law, but they won't be considered a victim of human trafficking unless there are elements of force, fraud, or coercion. This also means that these are the things that an investigator, a detective, depending on which branch of law enforcement is involved in the investigation, they are looking for these elements. They're looking for proof that the victim has been coerced. Coercion means manipulated, blackmailed, somehow relationally manipulated into engaging one of these commercial sex exploitation or forced labor. They may be looking for proof that there's fraud involved, meaning there have been lies told to the victim to lure them away or lure them into this exploitative situation. Or they're looking for force. Force would be the threat of violence, meaning I'm going to hurt you or hurt someone you care about if you don't do what I say, or being locked up, being tied up, anything that's a forcible action for the purposes of commercial sex or forced labor make it sex trafficking. So if someone is working in a job that they don't like, they're not making as much money as they wish they would be making, and they had a jerk for a boss, does that make it labor trafficking? No, right? Because they can quit that job anytime. Unless the boss is coercing them, lying to them, or forcing them to stay in that job, then they are not a victim of labor trafficking. If they are, let's use an example. We had a local business that was using labor trafficking victims as its employees. The reason they were labor trafficking victims, we're going to give you a case study on a local labor trafficking situation and let you determine the elements of force, fraud, or coercion that made this labor trafficking. Now, when we talk about a minor who's involved in sex trafficking, we do not have to prove that there's elements of force, fraud, or coercion. The law allows us to automatically protect that minor, anyone 17 years old or younger, as a victim. This is largely because a minor in Texas specifically cannot legally consent to sexual activity. Therefore, any form of commercial sexual exploitation is illegal for that minor, and this law allows us to protect them as a victim of sex trafficking and allows us to prosecute anyone involved as a trafficker. So labor trafficking is anytime someone is forced, lied to, threatened, or coerced into performing labor or services. Now, to be clear, labor trafficking can happen in perfectly legal industries. And that's what these pictures represent. We've got construction workers, cleaning crews, restaurant people in hospitality. Any of these legal industries can and have been caught employing labor trafficking victims. Sex trafficking is going to have very similar language. Anytime someone is forced, lied to, threatened, or coerced into performing sexual services in exchange for something of value. So here's the difference. That something of value does not have to be money. It can be drugs, it could be shelter, it could be affection, it could be technology, a safe place to live, dinner, gas for our car, anything that has value involved in a sex act makes it a commercial sex act. And if there's force, fraud, or coercion involved in why the person's performing that sex act for something of value, it becomes sex trafficking. Again, child sex trafficking is anytime someone under 18 years of age is involved in commercial sex. And let's be real clear about how the law defines commercial sex. Any sex act that is being performed in exchange for something of value becomes a commercial sex act. That could even include the production of pornography, the creating and sending of nude images or videos, stripping, actual sex acts, web sex. All of these things count as a sex act. And when there's something of value being exchanged, it becomes a commercial sex act. Commercial sex acts with the minor always protect them as victims of sex trafficking and give us the ability to prosecute those involved as human traffickers.